and the burning continues.
Hey guys, it's me, Alexa from Alexa Plays Games. Today I am so excited to share with you guys some tips and tricks for using my new favorite Hypercharge, Amby's Hypercharge. It is no secret that I love Amber. My first ever guide was an Amber guide and remains to this day my most viewed video. Back then, I made her guide because I wanted to show everyone that Amber is a lot more than just a damage dealer, and I think with her Hypercharge, people are going to fall back into the trap of assuming that once more. So while I was always planning on making a Hypercharge guide for Amby once it was released, I think it's important I cover how Amber's Hypercharge only enhances every element of her kit that I discussed in my original guide, not just her damage dealer side. Not to mention, the game just doesn't look the same as it did back when I made her original guide. The meta has shifted just so many times since then, and I've also been challenging myself to play her in a much higher league than I did before, evidenced by how I've now beaten not just 1, but 3 pros with Amber in the meantime. So yeah, I have definitely grown as an Amber main. Not only having her title on my main and mini, but also when they announced her Hypercharge, I was like, okay, cool, I'll finish extra mini Amby's mastery title for the guide. Only that was way too easy and I did it in like 2 seconds, so I ended up doing most of the guide with all 3 accounts having her title. So, I'm gonna cover some strategies for using her purple button to the fullest, but I'm also going to discuss some things that I may not have known back when I was making her original guide. So, stick around if you want your Hypercharged 15 minutes of flame, just like my girl, Amber.
Apply cold water to that burn. No, seriously, get it checked.
This is my go-to build. It's not the only build I use, but for most maps and modes, even if I forget to change my build, this build will serve me well. Those of you who have watched my Amber guide might be wondering, why damage gear over the mythic gear, Alexa? Well, after I made that guide, Supercell reworked like every terrible tank, and the meta has become tankier and tankier and tankier. So now I just default to the damage gear because in ladder, it's highly likely I'll be facing at least 1 tanky brawler every game, but I'm not saying the rest of her build is useless. So let's get into everything so you can put together a build that works for you. Starting with her gadgets. Both of her gadgets are good, but one is actually way better. Don't care what anybody says, it just is. So let's get started with her gadget that's good in certain situations, Dancing Flames. So I may have given everyone the impression in my original guide that I thought Dancing Flames was a bad gadget. No, it's not a bad gadget, it has its uses. I do use it on certain maps and in certain modes. It serves 3 main uses that gives it value in my personal opinion. The first is it melts the safe. One gadget will almost completely destroy one section of the heist safe. Yeah, the gadget rework has made it harder for Amby to melt the safe all in one go. More waiting and healing up is involved now. But it's still incredibly valuable in run-it-down maps like Hot Potato and Pit Stop, although now I have stopped using it on certain maps like Kaboom Canyon and Safe Zone because those are more control-based heist maps. The second use is dealing with tank. Amby is most vulnerable when she's out of ammo, so in modes that are super tanky like Brawl Ball, Dancing Flames can help you defend yourself and melt tank. Is it perfect protection? No. If your enemy can get inside of the flames and give you kissies, it won't do anything. This is why I think it's good defense against tanks, but not so much against assassins. This gadget doesn't help Amby charge up her hyper since it doesn't help her charge up supers. So I'd only use it where you have plenty of tank to feed off of, otherwise you'll have a hard time trying to charge up her hyper. Outside of Heist and Brawl Ball, it's more map dependent. Generally, if I decide to use Dancing Flames in other modes, I ask myself, are there walls on this map that are super annoying? If my answer is yes, I will still take Dancing Flames and resign myself to the fate of probably never charging up my Hypercharge, because as I said, this gadget doesn't help you charge up hypers at all. But it might still be wise to take it if you want to win. Nothing is more annoying than enemies who hide behind walls, especially if it prevents you from completing the objective. You can also deal with them by throwing your supers over walls, but on maps with too many annoying walls, I will opt to use Dancing Flames. Now for her best gadget, fire starters. That's right, I will die on this hill when it comes to actually charging up Amber's Hypercharge, especially in modes where you won't encounter as much tank as you will in Brawl Ball. You need fire starters, and I mean, even when you do encounter tanks, it's still useful. This gadget was already good when I made my original Amber guide, and since then it has only increased in value. Now with the gadget rework, you can cover the map in Amber supers, not only gaining a speed boost every 15 seconds, but also the ability to leave puddle traps everywhere, which means you're not only activating the well-oiled machine that is her build with this gadget from the second the game starts, in a way, I might add, that is impossible with Dancing Flames. You can also establish crazy map and area control at the same time. If you're not using this gadget, just try it for 10 games or so and I promise you'll see what I mean. Fire starters is Amber's best gadget, no competition. Moving on to her star powers, or should I say star power, because I can only recommend using one star power now that I've experimented with both, trying to see which does a better job charging up her hyper, and the winner was, drumroll please, Wild Flames. If you're curious how Scorch and Siphon works though, check out my original guide, but I will say I didn't find that it helped me charge up my hyper in any significant way. Wild Flames, on the other hand, has been my no-brainer must-have star power for years.
Wow, so much heat!
Like I said in my original guide, you get 2 abilities for the price of 1, and in my opinion, way better abilities. With Wild Flames, you can play Amby as a controller who can dominate half of the map by herself, as well as a damage dealer. You not only can throw multiple puddles and leave them on the map for area control that can cover half of the map, you can also use those puddles to constantly charge up your next super. I have found that Amber's super is much more efficient at charging up her hyper than her basic attack, since you can hit multiple targets at one time and the burn lasts for a while, which means there's a lot more added hypercharge charge when you land a super. If you pair fire starters with this star power, you can throw super after super after super, meaning you'll charge up your hyper much faster than if you're using Dancing Flames. If you miss a few or concentrate more on map control in the early game, with this star power, that's fine, because you're constantly charging up the next super, which isn't the case when you use Dancing Flames. Not to mention, if you have charged up her hyper, but you need your super, you can safely charge it up incognito in the grass, allowing you to surprise attack. In other words, this star power will allow you to use Amber's mechanics to the fullest, including using her hypercharge. The most common question I get is what gears are best for Amber. I stand by most of my original guide when it comes to gears, but I have changed my go-to gears due to the vastly different meta we found ourselves in. So let's get into it. First of all, I'd say the reload gear is a must-buy gear. Well, not if you're using Scorching Siphons, because the reload doesn't stack, but since we're using Wild Flames, then yes, this is a must-get gear. I know it's more expensive than the rest, but it's worth every coin. Like I said in my original guide, Amber is extremely vulnerable when she's out of ammo, so a boost to her ammo reload is a total game changer. This gear really helps because the only time I find myself running out of ammo is when my randoms are, well, randoming and I'm fighting a 1v3 the whole game. But that case thankfully is in the minority of games I play because your randoms really have to be terrible for you to get to that point. Mostly due to the fact that this gear does its job keeping Amby's ammo bar halfway to full at all times, which is the range you want to be for Amber in general, with or without her hyper.
Victory!
You know what I miss? Masteries.
Who's famous now?
At least I'll always have this moment. But I digress. My other go-to is the damage gear, which is also a must-buy gear in my opinion. Ever since they reworked the Fronkadonk last year, the meta has been nothing but tanky and aggressive. Amby, while she already does plenty of damage, needs the damage gear to compensate for it. The damage gear buff does stack with her Hypercharged buff, which gives Amber an enormous capacity for damage.
Woo! Muy caliente!
You might think the damage gear buffing her basic flames from 525 to 588 damage per Hypercharged flame doesn't sound like a huge change, but oh boy, it is. When you hold down the auto-aim button, as one does when playing Amber, it doesn't release just one flame at a time, but around 3 or 4, which means her basic does around 5800 damage per second with her damage gear and Hypercharged buff together, as compared to the 3400 damage per second she does without any buff. That means the damage gear paired with her Hypercharge turns her red hot flames to a purple face melting blaze that will absolutely delete whatever aggressive brawler is trying to get in your face, and like most brawlers in general, really. And that's just her basic attack. It also stacks with the damage you inflict with the puddle you throw with it activated. While I wouldn't recommend activating your hyper at such low health unless you're a safe enough distance away from your enemies, because you will be the focus of everyone's attention once you do, and it's easier for them to make you waste your hyper when you're at low health. But activating your hyper with your damage buff active will allow you to burn your enemies alive and can result in even the tankiest of brawlers dying to her hyper supers. Now, if you can only afford these 2 gears, you don't need the rest because those 2 are already great gears for all modes, but the other gears I'm going to discuss are useful if you have them already, starting with the vision gear. The vision gear, I'd say, is more good to have when you're playing on grassy maps. Since Amber is very good at finding enemies by fanning out her flames, she can play scout on grassy maps until she's burned all of the enemy grass, as should be your goal on any grassy map. I like to use this gear primarily on gem grab grassy maps, and I'll also take it into passive modes when I'm feeling extra and have a strange and probably highly ill-advised urge to play Amby and knockout. Since the cooldown reduction gear didn't exist when I made her original guide, I just felt like I should mention it. I'm personally not a big fan of this gear in general, but for Amber, I still feel like the cooldown for both fire starters and dancing flames is reasonable. But if you must use it,
Wow, so much heat!
it reduces dancing flames to 12 seconds and fire starters to 13 seconds. But for fire starters, keep in mind it doesn't start the cooldown until after the gadget is finished spilling puddles on the ground, so add another 3 seconds to that. Now, if you're the type who enjoys playing games with your enemies and you want to add an extra element of torture to it, you might consider using the Mythic gear. I only found this gear useful with her Hyper in Hot Zone and Gem Grab because these two modes are the only modes that there is a key area that the enemy has no choice but to step onto, and that is the area you throw it and leave it and wait for them to desperately get the gems and or get onto the zone, and that is when you light them all on fire and cackle as you burn them all alive. You know, classic controller specialist gameplay. But any other mode, enemies will just be able to avoid the puddle, so you don't get to torture them as much with it, so there's less value. So those are the gears that I felt were the most relevant when it comes to Amber's Hypercharged Mechanics. The rest aren't bad gears, but if you want an explanation for them, just check out my original guide. Is it just me, or did it get really cold in here?
Sliding into the sea!
Because of the massive size of her hyper puddle, using it is not the difficult part. Although there's different ways of using it, and don't worry, I'll cover that. But it's not a high skill hyper to master like Janet's or Melody's. But what's really difficult is how much it takes to charge it up. I was annoyed at first, but not at all surprised that her Wild Flame Star Power doesn't help her charge up her hyper. It sounds about right, actually. Supercell notoriously favors assassins, allowing Edgar and Daryl to exist and do nothing and still get their hyper way faster than Amber, as she's actually contributing to the game and earning super after super. Perhaps they were concerned that would make her broken, but hey, they had no problem with allowing Kenji's hyper to be super dumb broken for a month, but Amber is a controller, and thus she must sweat all game to charge it up according to Supercell. So if you're using Dancing Flames and never get her hyper, you're not alone. I've started using Fire Stars on maps I used to use Dancing Flames because it seems like her hyper charge rate was based around the idea of her charging up and landing super frequently with Wild Flames and Fire Starters. So the difficulty of playing Hypercharged Amby isn't that her hyper is difficult to master, it's because if you want to stand a chance of charging it up more than once a game, there are some things you need to know. So let's get into it.
Snowstorm!
So let's talk about her purple face melting plays, shall we? As I discussed before, the damage her Hypercharged Flames inflict is ridiculous and melt anyone in her path. The most straightforward way of using her Hypercharge is throwing her Hyper Super and then using the speed and damage boost to finish everyone off. But that isn't the only way to use her Hyper. Like I said before, her Hyper takes a while to charge up, and if you're using Dancing Flames, you're gonna have to earn her supers. So you can't just camp in a puddle for her Hyper Super, which is why if you have her Hyper but her Super isn't charged up yet, don't feel like you have to hold on to her Hyper if you need it in an emergency situation or you're close to completing the objective. In all likelihood, you'll charge up her Super before her Hyper times out, and there are some benefits to waiting to burn her Hyper puddles, which I'll get into in a bit. But there is an element to using her basic that I mentioned but didn't really cover in my original guide, her footwork. A big part of her mechanics is her footwork. Amby's basic does a lot of work for her. The flames will seek out your target no matter what direction you run. This is why you don't generally aim Amber's normal attack. It can be wise to do so sometimes, like I said in my original guide, but since generally her auto aim is the best aim, that means the skill in playing Amber is all in the footwork. The fact that Amber doesn't have to focus much on aim means that you can and should focus more on her movement. And with the speed boost her Hypercharge gives you, good footwork is even more important because you want to get the most value out of your Hyper and not let anyone take you down if you can help it while it's active. The biggest mistake I see players make is just charging forward with her basics, straightlining the enemy team. Yeah, if you do that, you will end up dead, unsurprisingly. Amber has one of the longest ranges in the game, and yes, her basic is strongest at mid-range, so that makes one aspect of her footwork incredibly important: spacing. With Amber, you want to stay mid to max range away from enemies at all times. This will make it harder for assassins to dash or jump on top of you, but also helps you outrange many of the brawlers in the game. If you're in mid-range, this is when you stop focusing on aiming and instead focus on juking, which means moving side to side and dodging shots. If enemies charge at you, back up and maintain the amount of space between you as well. Amby is weakest up close. Finally, if someone does manage to get in your face, pirouette. This is when you turn around your enemies in a circular motion. This gives you the advantage in the vast majority of matchups because most basic attacks are straight. So if you're pirouetting around your target, your flames will find your target, but their basic, even if they auto-aim, is likely to miss you completely. This is especially crucial when you're attacked by assassins.
Got frozen! Yikes!
As I said before, Amber's Hyper Super is enormous, so it's very easy to land. So most likely when you throw her Hyper Super, you're going to be doing a throw and burn. Considering how long it takes to charge up her Hyper Super, it's so satisfying when you hit the entire team with it and get an easy team wipe. In aggro modes like Heist and Brawl, this is going to be the main way you use your Hyper Supers. It's of course very useful in other modes as well, but because the more passive the mode, the harder her hyper is to charge up. I wanted to see if there was a way to get extra value with her hyper supers aside from just getting a team wipe. So while the throw and burn is the easiest way to use her hyper, bear with me, you can get value in other ways too.
Guess I'm famous now! Ice Queenie!
You can also use it for area control. This is actually something I haven't seen anyone else taking advantage of, but trust me, there is a benefit to doing this. If you throw a Hyper Super and allow your Hypercharge to time out before burning the enemy team with it, it helps you charge up your next Hyper. And in fact, you'll gain quite a bit of Hypercharge charge with it. I have found that when I throw Hyper Puddles and leave them to play mind games with the enemy team as I am wont to do, especially in Hot Zone and Gem Grab where the enemy team literally has no choice but to step on it if they want to complete the objective, most of the time they wait, refusing to step on it. But eventually, they get pretty desperate because they have to get onto the zone or grab just a few more gems and then I can burn them alive. Damaging the entire enemy team with your Hyper Super then charges nearly half or sometimes half of your next Hyper Super, depending on how tanky your enemies are. This is why I have found that area control is the best way to charge up your hyper twice a game. The most I've managed to do in one game is 3 hypers with this technique. However, in games like when I was randomly matched with SSG's Sands, where you have a spawn trapper wreaking havoc in your enemy spawn all game, sometimes area control is all you can do. But seriously, how do I keep getting carried by pros on my mini? Like, 2 guides in a row, this has happened now.
You fight like weak tea.
Should I get True Gold Kaze for her guide? Comment and let me know.
This is no joke!
Now it's actually crazy because this is the one I heard some Brawl esports commentators constantly bring up, but I'm actually not the biggest fan of this one. You can use it for map control, sure. It does burn plenty of grass on the map, but I feel like it's a waste of a hypercharge really. First of all, if you throw and burn, you'll likely finish your hyper without another super, and that's going to help you charge up your next hyper if possible. And area control can help you recharge your hyper in control-based modes, but map control, unless you know your enemies are all hiding in the grass, in which case, yes, burn it all. I am not the biggest fan of using your hyper this way. Using your regular supers for map control and your hyper for kills and damage is the best way to go in my opinion. Besides, considering how long it takes to charge up your hypercharge, if you haven't burned all of the enemy grass before you manage to charge up your hyper, you are not doing your job as Amber. Map control should be a natural result of you throwing supers in key spots, because enemies will most likely always be hiding there, and then, after it's gone, they can't use it against you anymore. But, I will say, it's important to keep an eye out for where your enemies are lurking, because if you do have your hyper super ready, you can definitely kill two birds with one stone. Literally. But just to summarize, to charge up her hyper quickly, remember to 1. Throw as many supers at enemies as possible. 2. If you don't have fire starters, focus on the tanky enemies. And 3. Of course, always throw supers on enemies who are grouped up. Basically, since Amber has a Pierce attack and her super can inflict damage on multiple enemies, her hyper was designed to account for all of that. Yes, because of this, if you're in Max Plus trophies or Legendary Plus and Ranked, it makes you sweat more because more advanced enemies don't tend to group up. It's possible but not probable. This is why for most maps and modes, I highly recommend going fire starters, because if you miss a super, it's not as big of a deal. But if you're going Dancing Flames, definitely target tanky brawlers, especially Kenji, just because I hate Kenji. Thank God. My toes can finally thaw out. I get asked a lot, where do I play Amber, Alexa? So I figured I should yap about where to play her and how to spot a new map that would be good for her, since Supercell has been making a lot of new maps too. The quick answer is everywhere. Pretty much every mode. She either can dominate, or at the very least you can make her work depending on matchup. But her playstyle varies mode to mode. In some modes, you want to be aggressive and attack immediately and wipe out the enemy team right away. But in other modes, you want to play more passive, burn puddles strategically, use her range instead of pushing into mid-range. That's the beauty of Amber. She's best if played aggressively, but she can be played passively too. If you can master how to use her in both aggressive and passive modes, you can learn how to overcome any matchup with her, no matter the mapper mode. So let's get started with her best mode, Hot Zone. She is the queen of Hot Zone after all, which is one of the reasons I love her so much. Since Hot Zone is my favorite mode, aside from parallel plays, I will take fire starters always in Hot Zone. I've found it's pretty guaranteed to get her hyper at least once in Hot Zone, and her area control and damage means she's always useful there. So definitely play her in Hot Zone always, no matter the map. If all you get are take randoms in Hot Zone, believe me, I've been there. And you want a mode where it's much easier to carry, you can also take Amber into Heist. Amby is not considered a huge threat in Heist by most, so she probably won't get banned for Heist ever, but you shouldn't underestimate her. She will melt the safe if you leave her alone. She deals a ton more damage than most players realize. For control-based maps like Safe Zone and Kaboom Canyon, I started using fire starters, but in general, if you take Dancing Flames, you can take out out the high safe easily. Not only that, Amby can defend very well if needed. She's like Melody, only a good defender too. If you love pushing in Brawl Ball, you definitely will like Amber here too. I'm a controller specialist, so I groan and complain the whole time I'm playing it because her control mechanics aren't very effective here, but her damage dealer side is. This is why I'll usually go Dancing Flames no matter the map. There are some exceptions, like Sneaky Fields, where I feel like the grass is too much of a threat for me to not burn it all as soon as possible, or Backyard Bowl, because there are a lot of brawlers who outrange her, so she needs the speed boost and there's more time to charge up supers and sharpshooter battles. But in general, you're not gonna have a lot of time to camp by your puddle, and Dancing Flames is just so good for spawn trapping the enemy in their goal. I almost always use it. Gem Grab is a great mode for Amby due to her ability to go from aggro to passive seamlessly. I always recommend fire starters here because grass is very key to grabbing gems and keeping gems safe. So naturally you want to destroy all of the enemy's grass to protect your gem carrier and make grabbing gems much more difficult for the enemy team. The passive nature of Gem Grab also allows you to camp on puddles more, giving fire starters plenty of value here. Now, it used to be only NPCs would take Amber into passive modes, but we're playing a different game now. Passive modes have been invaded by so much aggression, Amber actually works super well in passive modes now. It's honestly shocking to me. Of course, she's still outranged by sharpshooters, and if for some reason the entire enemy team is just sharpshooters, which nowadays is rare, just burn the enemy grass for your teammates and you've already contributed a lot to your team, since visibility is extremely important in sharpshooter battles. But with all of this aggression invading passive modes, just keep that aggression in check. And yeah, burning the grass makes aggressive brawlers struggle too. So no matter what scenario, Amber can be a very valuable teammate if played right. Don't go all guns a-blazing at the beginning like you're playing Brawl Ball. But use fire starters to charge up your supers and keep your teammates safe from aggression, and you'll see how she can be a very valuable member of the team on a lot of passive mode maps.
Wow, so much heat! Finally, my 15 minutes of flame!
Well, there you have it, everything you need to know to use Amby's Hypercharged to the fullest. I'm sorry this video took so long. I caught a cold a couple weeks ago and I actually had this video ready to record right then before I caught the cold, and then lost my voice before I could even really get started recording. But while waiting for my voice to return, I did experiment a lot more with her Hypercharged and learned a lot of new things while doing it, so this guide is definitely better because of it. If you liked this guide, make sure to like and subscribe because I will be making more, and it would help me to reach out to more players who like in-depth guides. A big thank you to Eddie and Fraudulent Fame for the carries. You're my goats. I'm working on Kaze's guide, so stay tuned, but until then, play later guys. Mwah!